The tea shop was crowded that afternoon, every table occupied by ladies in their finest silks and gentlemen discussing matters of consequence. Miss Eleanor Ashford stood at the entrance, her worn gloves clutched in trembling hands, searching desperately for a single empty chair. Her eyes landed on a table by the window where a solitary gentleman sat, his dark hair catching the autumn light. She approached with hesitant steps. "Forgive me, sir, but may I share this table?" The man looked up, his grey eyes assessing her threadbare cloak and modest bonnet with unmistakable disdain. "Only if I pay the bill," he said coldly, his voice carrying across the quiet room. "I cannot bear the thought of a woman of your station embarrassing herself." Eleanor's cheeks burned as every head turned toward them, whispers erupting like wildfire. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you're listening to this story. I want to know how far it has traveled. Eleanor Ashford had learned long ago that gratitude and silence were the twin pillars upon which a governess's existence rested. At 23, she had spent the last 5 years in the employ of the Hartley family, educating their 3 daughters in the arts of watercolor painting, French conversation, and the delicate navigation of society's expectations. The Hartley townhouse in Mayfair was a monument to wealth. Its marble floors gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers, and its drawing rooms were adorned with portraits of ancestors whose stern faces seemed to judge every passing servant. Eleanor's own quarters were tucked away on the 3rd floor, a small room with a narrow bed and a single window overlooking the Mews. She did not complain. She had no family to return to, no inheritance to cushion her future. The Hartleys provided her with food, shelter, and a modest salary that she saved with meticulous care, dreaming of a day when she might open a small school of her own, a place where girls without fortune might still receive an education. Mrs. Hartley, a woman whose beauty had faded into a permanent expression of dissatisfaction, treated Eleanor with the casual indifference reserved for furniture. Mr. Hartley, a portly gentleman preoccupied with his investments, barely acknowledged her existence. The daughters, Arabella, Cecilia, and young Harriet, were pleasant enough, though Arabella, at 18, had recently become consumed with preparations for her debut season and had little patience for lessons. It was during one of these increasingly distracted lessons that Mrs. Hartley swept into the schoolroom, her silk skirts rustling with purpose. "Miss Ashford, you will accompany us to Lady Pemberton's garden party this Saturday. Arabella requires a chaperone, and I cannot be expected to manage 3 girls alone." Eleanor's heart sank. She despised these social events where she existed in a peculiar limbo, neither guest nor servant, visible yet invisible. But she nodded obediently. "Of course, Mrs. Hartley." The day of the garden party arrived with unseasonable warmth. The Pemberton estate in Richmond was a sprawling testament to old money, its manicured lawns dotted with white tents and tables laden with delicacies. Eleanor wore her best dress, a modest grey muslin that had seen better days, and kept to the periphery, watching as Arabella fluttered from group to group, her laughter bright and calculated. It was there, beneath the shade of an ancient oak, that Eleanor first heard the name that would alter the course of her life: Duke of Ashmont. "His Grace has finally returned from the continent," whispered one matron to another. 3 years abroad, and still unmarried at 30. His mother must be beside herself. "I hear he's impossibly particular," her companion replied. "Refused every debutante last season. Claims he's looking for intellectual companionship of all things." Eleanor paid little attention to such gossip. Dukes and their matrimonial preferences existed in a realm so far removed from her own that they might as well have been discussing the habits of exotic birds. She occupied herself by ensuring Harriet did not ruin her dress with strawberry tarts and that Cecilia did not wander too near the ornamental pond. As the afternoon wore on, the heat became oppressive. Eleanor's head began to ache, and she longed for a quiet corner and a glass of water. She slipped away from the main gathering, following a gravel path that led to a more secluded area of the garden, where a small fountain burbled peacefully. She was not alone. A gentleman stood with his back to her, his tall frame silhouetted against the spray of water. His clothing marked him as a person of consequence. The cut of his coat was impeccable, his boots polished to a mirror shine. Eleanor turned to leave, not wishing to intrude, but her foot caught on a loose stone. She stumbled, catching herself against a marble bench with an audible gasp. The gentleman turned. His face was striking, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, and those remarkable grey eyes that seemed to see through pretense. "Are you injured?" His voice was deep, cultured, tinged with what might have been concern or merely polite inquiry. "No, sir. Forgive me. I did not mean to disturb you." Eleanor straightened, acutely aware of her flushed cheeks and disheveled appearance. "You're not disturbing me. The crowds are rather overwhelming, are they not?" He studied her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "I don't believe we've been introduced. I am Ashmont, the Duke." Eleanor's mouth went dry. She curtsied awkwardly. "Miss Eleanor Ashford, Your Grace. I am governess to the Hartley family." Something flickered in his expression. Disappointment, perhaps, or dismissal. A governess. How industrious. The warmth that had briefly touched his voice cooled perceptibly. "I trust the Hartleys treat you well. They are most generous, Your Grace." The lie came easily, worn smooth by repetition. Generous. He repeated the word as though tasting it, finding it wanting. "Yes, I'm sure." He turned back to the fountain, effectively ending the conversation. Eleanor took the dismissal for what it was, and retreated, her brief encounter with the Duke already fading into the category of forgettable moments. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Over the following weeks, Eleanor found herself crossing paths with the Duke with increasing frequency. At a musicale hosted by the Hartleys, he appeared as a guest of Mr. Hartley's business associate. At the lending library, where Eleanor spent her rare free afternoons, he was examining a volume of philosophy. Each time, their exchanges were brief, polite, and utterly devoid of warmth on his part. Then came the invitation that changed everything. Mrs. Hartley received word that the Duke's mother, the Dowager Duchess of Ashmont, was seeking a temporary governess for her young ward, while the girl's regular instructor recovered from illness. The position would last 3 months, and offered a salary that made Eleanor's careful savings seem paltry. "You will apply for this position, Mrs. Hartley informed her, though her tone suggested it was less opportunity than command. "It will reflect well on this household if our governess is selected for such a distinguished placement. Besides, Arabella is now out in society and has little need of you." Eleanor applied, attended an interview at the imposing Ashmont House in Grosvenor Square, and was hired within a week. The Dowager Duchess was a formidable woman in her 60s, her silver hair arranged in an elaborate coiffure, her bearing regal, despite her diminutive stature. "You come highly recommended, Miss Ashford. My ward, Lady Beatrice, is a spirited child of 10 who requires both discipline and encouragement. Can you provide both?" "I will do my utmost, Your Grace." "See that you do. My son may be the Duke, but this is my household, and I expect excellence." The Dowager's sharp eyes softened fractionally. "You will find us demanding but fair, Miss Ashford. Welcome to Ashmont House." Eleanor moved into her new quarters, a spacious room with actual curtains and a writing desk, and met Lady Beatrice, a dark-haired girl with her guardian's grey eyes, and a tendency to ask questions that had no easy answers. The work was challenging but rewarding, and for the first time in years, Eleanor felt a cautious optimism about her circumstances. She saw little of the Duke himself. He kept irregular hours, often dining at his club or attending parliamentary sessions. When their paths did cross in the corridors of Ashmont House, he offered curt nods and nothing more. Eleanor told herself she was relieved. The less attention she drew from her employer's son, the better. But the Dowager had other ideas. 6 weeks into Eleanor's tenure, she summoned the governess to her private sitting room. "Miss Ashford, you have exceeded my expectations. Lady Beatrice has flourished under your instruction. I am extending your position indefinitely, should you wish it." "Your Grace, I am honored. There is, however, a complication." The dowager's expression grew shrewd. "My son has expressed interest in your suitability." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "I assure you, Your Grace, I have conducted myself with the utmost propriety." "Peace, child. I do not question your virtue." The dowager waved a dismissive hand. "My son believes you would make an appropriate wife." The room tilted. "I beg your pardon? He requires a duchess. You are intelligent, well-mannered, and possess a certain dignity, despite your circumstances. He has decided you will do." The dowager's tone suggested she was discussing the selection of wallpaper. "The engagement will be announced at the midsummer ball in 3 weeks' time. You will, of course, require an entirely new wardrobe. I have already engaged a modiste." Eleanor's mind reeled. "But Your Grace, surely the Duke should be the one to— we have barely spoken." "My son is not a romantic, Miss Ashford. He views marriage as a practical arrangement. You should consider yourself fortunate. Many women would kill for such an opportunity." The dowager stood, signaling the end of the discussion. "The announcement will be made. Prepare yourself accordingly." In the days that followed, Eleanor existed in a state of numb disbelief. The Duke himself said nothing to her, though she caught him watching her during dinner with an expression she could not decipher. Was this truly how her life would unfold? Elevated from governess to duchess, through no choice or desire of her own, bound to a man who regarded her as a suitable acquisition rather than a person. The night before the midsummer ball, Eleanor stood before the mirror in her new gown, a creation of ivory silk and delicate lace that transformed her into someone she barely recognized. The girl who had scrubbed floors in her childhood, who had clawed her way to respectability through sheer determination, was about to become one of the most powerful women in England. She should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt trapped in a golden cage, far more confining than any she had known before. The Ashmont Midsummer Ball was the event of the season, held in the grand ballroom of Ashmont House, which had been transformed into a glittering wonderland of candlelight and summer flowers. Every member of the ton who mattered had received an invitation, and speculation about the evening's purpose had reached fever pitch. The Dowager Duchess had let slip to precisely the right people that an announcement of great importance would be made, and the rumour mill had done the rest. Eleanor descended the grand staircase on the arm of the Duke's private secretary, her new gown rustling with each step. She had been instructed to wait in an antechamber until summoned for the announcement. Her hands were ice-cold despite the warmth of the June evening, and her heart hammered against her ribs with such force she feared it might be visible through the silk bodice. The ballroom was a sea of colour and movement, ladies in their finest jewels, gentlemen in immaculate evening dress, all swirling to the strains of a waltz performed by a full orchestra. Eleanor had never seen such opulence, such careless display of wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across the polished floor, and the scent of hothouse roses mingled with expensive perfumes. She caught sight of the Duke across the room, resplendent in black evening clothes that emphasized his commanding height and aristocratic bearing. He was speaking with a young woman Eleanor did not recognize, a stunning creature with golden hair arranged in an elaborate coiffure, her gown of sapphire silk cut in the latest fashion. The woman's hand rested possessively on the Duke's arm, and she was laughing at something he had said, her face tilted up toward his with unmistakable intimacy. Eleanor's stomach clenched. She told herself it meant nothing. The Duke was a prominent figure in society. Of course, he would have acquaintances, even admirers. But something in the way he looked at the blonde woman, a softness in his usually stern features, sent a chill down Eleanor's spine. The dowager appeared at Eleanor's side, resplendent in purple silk and diamonds. "Compose yourself, Miss Ashford. You look as though you're about to faint." Forgive me, Your Grace. I am merely overwhelmed. You will become accustomed to it. The dowager's gaze followed Eleanor's to where the Duke stood with the blonde woman. Her lips thinned. That is Lady Cordelia Fairfax, an old friend of my son's. Pay her no mind. But Eleanor could not look away. Lady Cordelia was everything she was not, confident, beautiful, clearly born to this world of wealth and privilege. And the way the Duke smiled at her, with a warmth Eleanor had never seen directed at herself, made something crack inside her chest. The orchestra finished its piece, and the conductor raised his hand for silence. The dowager squeezed Eleanor's arm. "It is time. Come." They moved through the crowd, which parted before the dowager like the Red Sea before Moses. Eleanor's legs felt disconnected from her body, carrying her forward through sheer momentum. They reached the raised dais at the end of the ballroom, where the Duke stood waiting. He did not look at Eleanor. His eyes were fixed on some point above the crowd, his expression unreadable. The dowager stepped forward, and the room fell into expectant silence. "My dear friends, thank you for joining us this evening. It is my great pleasure to announce—" "Mother, wait!" The Duke's voice cut through the dowager's words like a blade. He stepped forward, and for the first time that evening, his eyes met Eleanor's. What she saw there made her blood turn to ice, not warmth, not even polite regard, but something closer to pity. Or was it contempt? "I cannot do this." His words rang out across the silent ballroom, each syllable a hammer blow. "I cannot in good conscience proceed with this engagement." The dowager's face went white. "Sebastian, what are you—" "Miss Ashford is a fine woman, I'm sure, a competent governess, but she is not—" He paused, and the pause was more damning than any words could be. "She is not suitable to be the Duchess of Ashmont. I have realized that I cannot marry for mere convenience. I require more than adequacy. I require—" His gaze drifted to where Lady Cordelia stood, her blue eyes wide with shock, or perhaps triumph. "I require a partner who understands this world, who was born to it, someone who can stand beside me as an equal, not as a project to be molded and improved." The ballroom erupted in whispers, 1,000 conversations igniting simultaneously. Eleanor stood frozen, each word landing like a physical blow. Not suitable, adequacy, a project. The humiliation was so complete, so absolute, that for a moment she could not even process it. This was happening. In front of 500 members of the aristocracy, she was being rejected, dismissed, reduced to nothing. Lady Cordelia moved through the crowd, her expression carefully arranged into concern, but Eleanor saw the gleam of satisfaction in her eyes. She reached the Duke's side and placed a hand on his arm, the same possessive gesture Eleanor had witnessed earlier. "Your Grace, perhaps this conversation should be held in private." "No." The Duke's voice was firm. "I will not compound my mistake by allowing Miss Ashford to labor under false expectations a moment longer. She deserves honesty, however painful." He turned back to Eleanor, and she saw that he believed himself to be doing something noble, something kind. "You will, of course, retain your position as Lady Beatrice's governess for as long as you wish it. This changes nothing regarding your employment. This changes nothing." Eleanor felt something inside her shatter, not her heart, for she had never loved him, but something more fundamental, her dignity, her sense of self-worth, the careful armor she had built over years of navigating a world that viewed her as lesser. The dowager found her voice cold with fury. "Sebastian, you will cease this display immediately, and—" "I'm sorry, Mother, but my mind is made." He offered his arm to Lady Cordelia, who took it with barely concealed delight. "Please continue with the ball. There is no reason to let this unfortunate situation spoil the evening. No reason." Eleanor watched as the Duke led Lady Cordelia away, the crowd parting before them, whispers rising to a roar. She was dimly aware of the dowager speaking to her, of hands guiding her from the dais, of pitying looks and barely suppressed smirks from faces in the crowd. Someone laughed, a bright, cruel sound that cut through the noise. She found herself in a small withdrawing room off the main ballroom, the dowager pacing before her like a caged lioness. That foolish, foolish boy. I will speak with him. This can be salvaged. We will say it was a misunderstanding, that the announcement was premature. No. Eleanor's voice emerged as a whisper, but it stopped the dowager mid-stride. Please, Your Grace, no more. Miss Ashford, you must understand, my son is not thinking clearly. Lady Cordelia has always had an unfortunate influence on him. This infatuation will pass, and he will see reason. I do not want him to see reason. Eleanor stood on trembling legs, her hands clenched in the silk of her gown. I do not want to marry a man who views me as inadequate. I do not want to be improved or molded or elevated. I want... Her voice broke. I want to leave. Now. Tonight. The dowager's expression softened fractionally. Where will you go? I don't know, but I cannot remain here. Surely you see that. For a long moment, the dowager said nothing. Then she nodded slowly. Very well. I will have my carriage prepared. But Miss Ashford, Eleanor, you must promise me something. What, Your Grace? Promise me you will not let this destroy you. My son is a fool, but you are not. You are young, intelligent, and stronger than you know. Do not let this night define you. Eleanor wanted to believe her, but as she fled Ashmont House in the dowager's carriage, her beautiful gown crumpled and tear-stained, she could not imagine how she would ever recover from such complete and public devastation. The whispers would follow her everywhere. The pity, the judgment. She had been elevated only to be cast down, and the fall had been witnessed by everyone who mattered in English society. She had nowhere to go, no family to shelter her, and her reputation, the only currency a woman in her position possessed, was in ruins. The carriage rattled through the London streets as dawn broke over the city, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold that mocked Eleanor's devastation. She had given the driver the only address that came to mind, a modest townhouse in Bloomsbury, where her former schoolmistress, Miss Agatha Pemberton, had retired after 40 years of educating young women of limited means. Miss Pemberton answered the door herself, her grey hair in a nightcap, her expression transforming from confusion to concern as she took in Eleanor's dishevelled appearance. Eleanor Ashford, as I live and breathe. Child, what has happened? The story poured out of Eleanor in broken fragments, the unexpected proposal, the public rejection, the humiliation that would follow her like a shadow. Miss Pemberton listened without interruption, her lined face growing increasingly stern. When Eleanor finally fell silent, exhausted by the telling, the older woman spoke with characteristic bluntness. The Duke of Ashmont is a fool and a coward, but you, my dear, are neither. You will stay here as long as you need. And then you will show London society exactly what they have underestimated. How? Eleanor's voice was hollow. I am ruined. No respectable family will employ me now. The scandal will be tomorrow's news, forgotten when the next drama unfolds. But more importantly, who says you need employment from respectable families? Miss Pemberton's eyes gleamed with something Eleanor had not seen in years. The fierce determination of a woman who had built a life on her own terms. You have skills, Eleanor. Intelligence. You speak 3 languages fluently. You understand mathematics and literature. You can navigate society's complexities. These are not qualities that should be wasted on teaching spoiled aristocratic children. Then what would you have me do? Come with me tomorrow evening. There is someone I want you to meet. The following evening, Eleanor found herself in a drawing room unlike any she had encountered before. The townhouse belonged to Mrs. Harriet Blackwood, a wealthy widow who had made her fortune through shrewd investments after her husband's death. The room was filled with women, some young, some old, all engaged in animated conversation about topics that would have scandalized a traditional society gathering. Politics, business, philosophy, science. Miss Pemberton introduced Eleanor to Mrs. Blackwood, a handsome woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an even sharper wit. So you're the governess who was publicly rejected by Ashmont. How deliciously scandalous. Eleanor flinched, but Mrs. Blackwood's tone held no mockery. "Tell me, Miss Ashford, what did you think of the Duke before this debacle?" The question caught Eleanor off guard. I barely knew him, ma'am. We spoke perhaps a dozen times, always briefly. He seemed intelligent but distant, cold even. And yet you agreed to marry him. I was not given much choice in the matter. The Dowager Duchess arranged it. Ah, so you were to be a transaction, not a partner. Mrs. Blackwood nodded thoughtfully. And how did that make you feel? No one had asked Eleanor that question. Not the Dowager, not the Duke, not even Miss Pemberton. Trapped, she admitted quietly, like I was trading one form of servitude for another, albeit a gilded one. Then perhaps the Duke did you a favor, though he went about it in the most brutish way imaginable. Mrs. Blackwood gestured to the women around them. We are what society calls bluestockings, Miss Ashford. Unfeminine creatures who dare to think and speak and act independently. We invest in businesses, we write under pseudonyms, we support causes that proper ladies should ignore, and we are always looking for intelligent women to join our ranks. Over the following weeks, Eleanor was introduced to a world she had never imagined existed. Mrs. Blackwood's circle included a female physician who ran a clinic for the poor, a novelist who published under a male name, a mathematician who consulted for engineering firms, and a dozen other women who had carved out lives of purpose and independence. They welcomed Eleanor not with pity, but with curiosity, asking her opinions on everything from the Reform Bill to the latest scientific discoveries. It was at one of these gatherings, 6 weeks after the disastrous ball, that Eleanor met Dr. James Hartwell. He was a rarity in Mrs. Blackwood's drawing room, a man, and a young one at that, perhaps 30 years of age. He had dark hair that perpetually looked windswept, warm brown eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, and an easy smile that transformed his rather ordinary features into something approaching handsome. Dr. Hartwell was a physician who had recently returned from 3 years working in a hospital in Edinburgh, where he had studied new surgical techniques. He was in London to establish a practice and, more ambitiously, to open a teaching hospital that would train both male and female medical students, a radical notion that had made him something of a pariah among his more conservative colleagues. "Miss Ashford," he said when Mrs. Blackwood introduced them, "I understand you speak fluent French and German. I'm in desperate need of someone who can translate medical texts for my research. Would you be interested in such work? It pays modestly, but honestly." Eleanor stared at him. "You would hire me despite the fact that a duke publicly humiliated you?" Dr. Hartwell's expression was kind, but matter-of-fact. "Miss Ashford, I judge people by their abilities and character, not by the opinions of aristocrats who have never done a day's useful work in their lives. From what Mrs. Blackwood tells me, you are precisely the sort of intelligent, dedicated person I need. The question is whether you're interested." "Yes," the word emerged without hesitation. "Yes, I am very interested." Dr. Hartwell proved to be an excellent employer and gradually a friend. He treated her as an equal, asking her opinions and actually listening to her answers. He had no interest in society's rigid hierarchies and seemed genuinely baffled by the scandal that had driven Eleanor from her previous life. "The Duke sounds like a pompous ass," he remarked one afternoon as they worked side by side in his study. "Begging your pardon for the language, but really, to announce an engagement and then retract it publicly, that's not the behavior of a gentleman, whatever his title might be." Eleanor found herself smiling, something that had seemed impossible just weeks earlier. "He believed he was being honest, saving me from a loveless marriage, by humiliating you instead. That's not honesty, Miss Ashford. That's cruelty dressed up as virtue." Dr. Hartwell set down his pen and looked at her seriously. "You deserve better. I hope you know that." She did not know it, not yet. But working alongside Dr. Hartwell, surrounded by Mrs. Blackwood's circle of remarkable women, Eleanor began to feel the first stirrings of something she had not experienced in years: hope. Not hope for rescue or elevation, but hope that she might build a life of her own choosing, one defined by her own abilities rather than society's limitations. 3 months after the midsummer ball, Eleanor received an unexpected letter. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the seal was not. It bore the crest of the Duke of Ashmont. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The letter was not from the Duke, but from Lady Beatrice, the young ward Eleanor had briefly tutored. The girl's handwriting was careful and precise. "Dear Miss Ashford, I miss you terribly. My new governess is horrid and smells of camphor. Uncle Sebastian is very unhappy, though he pretends otherwise. He and Lady Cordelia are to be married next month, and grandmother says it is a disaster in the making. I heard her tell Uncle Sebastian that he is throwing away his life on a beautiful fool. He did not argue with her. I thought you should know. I hope you are well and happy. Your affectionate pupil, Beatrice." Eleanor read the letter 3 times, trying to untangle her feelings. The Duke was to marry Lady Cordelia. She should feel nothing. He had made his choice clear. And yet, there was a hollow ache in her chest that had nothing to do with lost love and everything to do with lost possibility. Not the possibility of being a duchess, but the possibility of being seen, truly seen, by someone who mattered. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in her desk drawer. Then she returned to her translation work, losing herself in the precise language of medicine, in the satisfaction of work well done. The Duke of Ashmont was marrying his beautiful fool, and Eleanor Ashford was building a life that belonged entirely to herself. That evening, at Mrs. Blackwood's weekly gathering, Dr. Hartwell sought her out. "Miss Ashford, I have a proposition for you. My teaching hospital has received funding. We will open in 6 months, and I need an administrator, someone who can manage correspondence, oversee translations, coordinate with suppliers, and generally keep the entire enterprise from descending into chaos. The position would be permanent and would pay enough for you to live independently. Would you consider it?" Eleanor looked at him, this kind, brilliant man who saw her as a person of value, and then at the room full of women who had welcomed her into their unconventional circle. She thought of the Duke and his golden cage, of Lady Cordelia and her hollow beauty, of the life she had almost been forced into. "Yes," she said firmly, "I would be honored to accept." Dr. Hartwell's face broke into a wide smile. "Excellent. Then let us toast to new beginnings." He raised his glass, and Eleanor raised hers, feeling for the first time since that terrible night that perhaps, just perhaps, she had not been destroyed after all. She had been set free. The Hartwell Teaching Hospital opened its doors on a crisp October morning, and Eleanor stood in the entrance hall, marveling at what had been accomplished in 6 short months. The building, a former warehouse in Southwark, had been transformed into a clean, efficient medical facility with separate wards for men and women, a surgical theatre equipped with the latest instruments, and a library stocked with texts in multiple languages, many of which Eleanor herself had translated. Her role as administrator had expanded beyond anything she had initially imagined. She managed a staff of 15, coordinated with suppliers and donors, maintained meticulous records, and served as Dr. Hartwell's right hand in all matters of organization. The work was demanding and occasionally overwhelming, but it filled her with a sense of purpose she had never known as a governess. More than that, she had discovered she was good at it. Her years of navigating the complex social hierarchies of aristocratic households had given her unexpected skills in managing personalities and mediating conflicts. Her education, once viewed as merely ornamental, proved invaluable in correspondence and negotiation, and her natural intelligence, so long confined to teaching children, finally had room to flourish. Dr. Hartwell had become not just an employer, but a true friend. He valued her opinions, trusted her judgment, and treated her with a respect that still sometimes caught her off guard. There was nothing romantic in their relationship. He was devoted to his work with a single-mindedness that left little room for personal attachments, and Eleanor had no desire to complicate the best professional relationship of her life with messy emotions. But she was not blind to the way he looked at her sometimes, with a warmth that went beyond mere collegial regard. And she was not immune to his qualities, his kindness, his brilliant mind, his unwavering commitment to helping those whom society had forgotten. If she were ever to consider marriage again, it would be to someone like James Hartwell, who saw her as an equal rather than a project. The hospital's opening was marked by a small ceremony attended by Mrs. Blackwood's circle and a handful of progressive-minded physicians and philanthropists. Eleanor stood to the side, content to let Dr. Hartwell take the spotlight, but he insisted on acknowledging her contribution. "None of this would have been possible without Miss Eleanor Ashford," he announced to the assembled guests. "Her organizational genius, her linguistic skills, and her tireless dedication have been the foundation upon which this hospital stands. I am honored to call her my colleague and my friend." The applause that followed was genuine and warm, and Eleanor felt her cheeks flush with pleasure. This was recognition earned through her own efforts, not bestowed by accident of birth or marriage. It meant everything. Among the guests was a journalist from the Morning Chronicle, a young man named Mr. Whitmore, who was known for his progressive views and his interest in social reform. He approached Eleanor after the ceremony. "Miss Ashford, I would very much like to write an article about the hospital and your role in its establishment. A woman in such a position of responsibility is newsworthy, and I believe our readers would be inspired by your story." Eleanor hesitated. Public attention was the last thing she wanted, especially given the scandal that still clung to her name in certain circles. But Dr. Hartwell encouraged her. "It would be excellent publicity for the hospital, and you deserve the recognition." The article appeared 2 weeks later, occupying half a page in one of London's most widely read newspapers. It was titled, "From Governess to Administrator, the Remarkable Miss Ashford," and it detailed her journey from public humiliation to professional success with a frankness that made Eleanor simultaneously proud and anxious. Mr. Whitmore had been careful not to name the Duke directly, referring only to a prominent aristocrat's callous rejection, but anyone who had been at the Midsummer Ball would know exactly whom he meant. The article's publication had immediate consequences. Donations to the hospital increased dramatically, with several wealthy patrons expressing admiration for Eleanor's resilience. But it also brought unwanted attention. Eleanor began to notice people staring at her when she walked through the hospital or ran errands in the neighborhood. Some looks were admiring, others curious, and a few openly hostile, particularly from women who viewed her independence as a threat to proper social order. And then, 3 weeks after the article's publication, Eleanor received an invitation that made her blood run cold. It was from the Dowager Duchess of Ashmont, requesting Eleanor's presence at a charity gala to benefit children's education. The event was to be held at Ashmont House. Eleanor's first instinct was to refuse. She had no desire to return to the scene of her humiliation, no wish to encounter the Duke or his beautiful fiancée. But Miss Pemberton, ever practical, urged her to reconsider. "You cannot hide forever, Eleanor, and this is a charity close to your heart, education for children without means. More importantly, you would be attending as a successful professional woman, not as a rejected bride. Show them what you have become." Mrs. Blackwood agreed. "The best revenge is living well, my dear, and you have done more than live well. You have thrived. Let them see it." Dr. Hartwell offered to accompany her. "Not as a romantic partner," he clarified with a gentle smile, "but as a friend and colleague. You should not have to face that crowd alone." And so, on a cold November evening, Eleanor found herself once again ascending the steps of Ashmont House, this time in a gown of deep burgundy velvet that Mrs. Blackwood had insisted on commissioning for her. Her hair was arranged in a sophisticated style, and she wore a simple gold locket that had belonged to her mother, her only piece of real jewelry. She looked, she thought with some satisfaction, like exactly what she was, a woman of substance and accomplishment. Dr. Hartwell was resplendent in evening dress, his usual disheveled appearance transformed into something approaching elegance. He offered her his arm. "Ready?" "No, but let us proceed anyway." The ballroom was as magnificent as Eleanor remembered, though this time she entered not as a pawn in someone else's game, but as an invited guest. Heads turned as they were announced, and Eleanor heard the whispers begin immediately. But this time, the whispers held a different quality, not just scandal and pity, but curiosity and even respect. The Dowager Duchess swept toward them almost immediately, her expression unreadable. "Miss Ashford, Dr. Hartwell, how good of you to come." She took Eleanor's hands in hers, and her voice dropped to a murmur. "You look magnificent, child. I'm so very proud of what you have accomplished." "Thank you, Your Grace. Your support meant more than you know." "I have a confession," the Dowager said quietly. "I am the one who suggested to Mr. Whitmore that he write about you. I thought it was time London society learned what they had overlooked." She squeezed Eleanor's hands once more, then released them. "Enjoy the evening, and do try the champagne. It is excellent." Eleanor and Dr. Hartwell moved through the crowd, and Eleanor was surprised by the number of people who approached her with genuine interest. Several women from Mrs. Blackwood's circle were in attendance, and they formed a protective and supportive circle around her. A prominent banker expressed interest in donating to the hospital. A member of Parliament engaged Dr. Hartwell in a lengthy discussion about medical reform. And then, across the crowded ballroom, Eleanor saw him. The Duke of Ashmont stood near the windows, and beside him was Lady Cordelia, resplendent in ice-blue silk and diamonds. The Duke looked older than Eleanor remembered, his face drawn, his posture stiff. Lady Cordelia was speaking animatedly to a group of admirers, her laughter bright and artificial. The Duke's eyes met Eleanor's across the room, and something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or regret. He began to move toward her, but Lady Cordelia's hand shot out, gripping his arm possessively. She had noticed Eleanor as well, and her beautiful face hardened with something ugly. "Miss Ashford." The Duke's voice was carefully neutral as he and Lady Cordelia approached. "I did not expect to see you here. Your mother was kind enough to invite me, Your Grace." Eleanor kept her voice equally neutral, though her heart was racing. "May I introduce Dr. James Hartwell? He is the founder and director of the new teaching hospital in Southwark." "Ah, yes. I read about your venture in the Chronicle." The Duke's gaze shifted to Dr. Hartwell, assessing. "A noble endeavor, though I understand it is quite controversial in some medical circles." "Progress always is, Your Grace." Dr. Hartwell's tone was pleasant but firm. "But Miss Ashford and I believe that medical knowledge should be accessible to all, not just the wealthy." "How very democratic of you." Lady Cordelia's voice dripped with condescension. "Though I cannot imagine why a woman would wish to involve herself in such unpleasant matters. Surely there are more suitable occupations for a lady." "I am not a lady, Lady Cordelia. I'm a working woman, and I find my occupation both suitable and deeply satisfying." Eleanor met the blonde woman's gaze steadily. "But then, we all must find purpose where we can." The barb struck home. Lady Cordelia's eyes flashed with anger, but before she could respond, the Duke spoke. "Miss Ashford, I wonder if I might have a word with you in private." "I think not, Your Grace. Anything you wish to say to me can be said in front of Dr. Hartwell." The Duke's jaw tightened. "Very well. I wanted to apologize for my behavior at the Midsummer Ball. It was unconscionably rude, and you deserved better." "Yes, I did." Eleanor's voice was calm, almost detached. "But I have come to realize that your rejection was a gift, though you did not intend it as such. You freed me to build a life of my own choosing, rather than one imposed upon me. For that, I suppose I should thank you." "Eleanor, Miss Ashford, I made a terrible mistake." The Duke's composure cracked slightly. "I have thought of you often these past months. When I read about your accomplishments, I realized, Sebastian, really?" Lady Cordelia's voice was sharp. "This is hardly the time or place for such a conversation. We have guests to attend to." Cordelia is right, Your Grace. Eleanor's tone was gentle but final. You have made your choice, and I have made mine. I wish you well in your marriage. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversations and introductions. Eleanor found herself surrounded by people who valued her for her work and her intelligence, not her potential as an ornament. And when Dr. Hartwell suggested they leave, she agreed readily, eager to return to the world she had built for herself. As their carriage rolled through the London streets, Dr. Hartwell spoke quietly. You were magnificent tonight, Eleanor. You faced them with such grace and dignity. I had excellent support. She smiled at him. Thank you, James, for everything. Eleanor, I must tell you something. He took a deep breath, and she saw nervousness in his expression, an emotion she had rarely witnessed in her confident colleague. These past months, working alongside you, I have come to admire you tremendously. Your intelligence, your dedication, your strength of character, and I have realized that my feelings have grown beyond mere professional regard. I am not asking you to respond to this declaration. I know you have been through a great deal, and the last thing I wish to do is pressure you, but I wanted you to know that should you ever wish for more than friendship, I would be honored beyond measure. Eleanor looked at this good, kind man who had given her a chance when no one else would, who had treated her as an equal, who had stood beside her tonight without hesitation. She thought of the Duke and his cold calculation, his belated regrets, his inability to see her worth until she had proven it to the world. And she knew, with sudden clarity, what her answer would be. But not tonight. Tonight had been about reclaiming her dignity, about showing London society that Eleanor Ashford could not be broken. The future, her future with James Hartwell, could wait a little longer. Ask me again in the spring, she said softly, when the hospital is fully established and we have had time to be certain of our feelings. But James, I am not opposed to the possibility. His face lit with a joy that made him truly handsome. Then I will ask you in the spring, and I will hope for a favorable answer. As the carriage carried them away from Ashmont House and toward the life Eleanor had built for herself, she felt a profound sense of peace. She had faced her past and emerged victorious, and her future, for the first time in her life, was entirely her own to shape. Winter settled over London with unusual severity, bringing snow that transformed the city into a landscape of white and grey. The Hartwell Teaching Hospital faced its first real test as cases of influenza and pneumonia flooded the wards. And Eleanor worked alongside Dr. Hartwell and the staff from dawn until well past dark, managing resources and coordinating care with the efficiency that earned her the respect of even the most skeptical physicians. It was during one of these exhausting days, as Eleanor reviewed supply inventories in her small office, that an unexpected visitor arrived. The nurse who announced her looked flustered. Miss Ashford, there is a Lady Cordelia Fairfax here to see you. She insists it is urgent. Eleanor's first instinct was to refuse the visit, but curiosity won out. Show her in. Lady Cordelia entered wrapped in furs, her beautiful face pinched with cold and something else. Desperation, perhaps, or anger. She looked around the modest office with barely concealed disdain before settling her gaze on Eleanor. Miss Ashford, I will be direct. You must stop seeing the Duke. Eleanor set down her pen carefully. I beg your pardon? Do not play innocent. Sebastian has been making inquiries about you. He asks about your hospital, your work, your circumstances. He has even suggested postponing our wedding. Lady Cordelia's voice rose slightly. You have bewitched him somehow, and I will not allow you to ruin my future. Lady Cordelia, I have not seen the Duke since your mother's charity gala 3 months ago. If he is having doubts about your marriage, I assure you I have nothing to do with it. You have everything to do with it. Lady Cordelia's composure cracked completely. He compares me to you constantly. Your intelligence, your accomplishments, your independence. As if any of that matters in a wife. A duchess should be beautiful, well-connected and accomplished in the social graces. That is what I offer. What can you possibly give him that I cannot? Eleanor stood, her patience exhausted. Respect, perhaps. Partnership. The ability to see him as a person, rather than a title and a fortune. But Lady Cordelia, you need not worry. I have no intention of pursuing the Duke of Ashmont. He made his feelings about me abundantly clear last summer, and I have moved on with my life. I suggest you discuss your concerns with your fiancé, not with me. He will not discuss it. He simply grows more distant by the day. Lady Cordelia's anger collapsed into something closer to despair. I have waited for him for years, turned down other offers, positioned myself perfectly. And now, when I am finally to have everything I have worked for, you appear and ruin it all. Despite herself, Eleanor felt a flicker of sympathy. Lady Cordelia, if the Duke truly loved you, nothing I could do would change that. Perhaps you should ask yourself whether you want to marry a man who compares you unfavorably to someone else. Love. Lady Cordelia spat the word like a curse. What does love matter? Marriage is about position, security, family alliances. Love is a fantasy for shop girls and governesses. Then I am glad to be a former governess. Eleanor moved toward the door, opening it in clear dismissal. I have work to do, Lady Cordelia. I wish you well, but I cannot help you. Lady Cordelia swept out without another word, leaving a chill in the room that had nothing to do with the winter weather. Eleanor returned to her desk, but she could not concentrate. Lady Cordelia's visit had unsettled her, not because of any lingering feelings for the Duke, but because it suggested complications she had no desire to navigate. That evening, Dr. Hartwell found her still in her office, staring at paperwork without seeing it. Eleanor, you should go home. You have been here since dawn. James, may I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever regret your choices? Choosing medicine over a more conventional life, opening this hospital despite the opposition, associating with radicals and reformers? He considered the question seriously. No, I regret mistakes I have made along the way, certainly, but the fundamental choices that have shaped my life, those I would make again without hesitation. Why do you ask? Lady Cordelia came to see me today. She accused me of interfering in her engagement to the Duke. Doctor, Hartwell's expression darkened. That is absurd. You have done nothing of the kind. I know, but it made me realize that I will never be free of that connection, that scandal. It will follow me always, coloring how people see me. Only if you allow it to. He crossed to her desk, his expression earnest. Eleanor, you are not defined by what the Duke did to you. You are defined by what you have done since, the life you have built, the work you have accomplished. Anyone who cannot see that is not worth your concern. Is that why you care for me? Because of what I have accomplished? I care for you because of who you are. The accomplishments are simply evidence of a character I have come to admire and, yes, to love. He paused, then added quietly, It is not yet spring, but I find I cannot wait. Eleanor Ashford, will you marry me? The question hung in the air between them, momentous and terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Eleanor looked at this man who had given her a chance when she had nothing, who had treated her as an equal, who had stood beside her without hesitation or shame. She thought of the life they could build together, a partnership of equals, working toward shared goals, bound by mutual respect and growing affection. Yes, she said simply. Yes, James, I will marry you. His face transformed with joy, and he came around the desk to take her hands in his. You have made me the happiest of men. We will be married quietly, if you prefer, with only our closest friends present. And afterward, we will continue our work here together. Together, Eleanor repeated, and the word felt like a promise and a benediction. They were married 6 weeks later, in a small ceremony at the church near Mrs. Blackwood's townhouse. Miss Pemberton stood as Eleanor's witness, and Mrs. Blackwood hosted a modest wedding breakfast afterward. There were no grand balls, no society announcements, no elaborate trousseau. Eleanor wore a simple gown of cream silk, and James wore his best suit, and they spoke their vows with quiet conviction before a handful of people who truly cared for them. It was, Eleanor thought, the most perfect day of her life. The news of Eleanor's marriage spread through London society with predictable speed, and reactions varied widely. Mrs. Blackwood's circle celebrated enthusiastically. The medical community expressed cautious approval, and among the aristocracy there were whispers, some admiring Eleanor's independence, others scandalized by her choice of a mere physician over a duke. 3 days after the wedding, Eleanor received a letter. The handwriting was familiar, though she had not seen it in months. The Duke of Ashmont. She considered burning it unread, but curiosity won out. The letter was brief. Miss Ashford, Mrs. Hartwell, I have just learned of your marriage. I write to offer my congratulations and my sincere apologies. I have been a fool, and I have lost something precious through my own arrogance and blindness. Dr. Hartwell is a fortunate man. I wish you every happiness. Your servant, Ashmont. Eleanor read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in her desk drawer beside Lady Beatrice's earlier correspondence. She felt no triumph, no vindication, only a quiet sadness for what might have been if the Duke had been a different sort of man. But that sadness was distant, already fading, overshadowed by the genuine happiness of her present circumstances. That evening she and James sat together in the small but comfortable house they had taken near the hospital, reviewing plans for expanding the facility's services. Their conversation flowed easily between professional matters and personal observations, the comfortable discourse of two people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Eleanor, James said suddenly, setting aside his papers, I want you to know that I do not expect you to give up your work at the hospital. I know some men would insist their wives retire to domestic life, but I married you precisely because of your intelligence and dedication. I hope you will continue as administrator for as long as you wish. I will, Eleanor said firmly, though I confess I have been thinking about expanding our mission. What if we established a school alongside the hospital? A place where young women could train as nurses and midwives, where they could learn the skills to support themselves. James's eyes lit with enthusiasm. That is a brilliant idea. We could model it on the programs in Germany and France. It would be controversial, of course, but when has that stopped us? They spent the rest of the evening sketching out plans, their excitement building as they envisioned what they might create together. And Eleanor realized that this partnership of minds and hearts, this shared purpose and mutual respect, was worth more than any title or fortune could ever be. She had not married a duke. She had married a man who saw her as an equal, who valued her contributions, who wanted to build a life with her rather than simply acquiring her as an ornament. And in doing so, she had found something far more precious than social elevation. She had found freedom. Spring arrived in London with a burst of colour and warmth, and with it came the official opening of the Hartwell School of Nursing, housed in a new wing of the teaching hospital. Eleanor stood in the bright classroom, watching as 20 young women, the school's first cohort, took their seats, their faces alight with determination and hope. These were girls from modest backgrounds, many of them former servants or factory workers, all of them hungry for the opportunity to learn a profession that would give them independence and purpose. Dr. Hartwell, James, as Eleanor now thought of him always, delivered the opening address, speaking of the importance of compassionate, skilled medical care and the vital role nurses would play in the hospital's mission. But it was Eleanor who had designed the curriculum, hired the instructors, and personally interviewed each student. This was her vision made real, and the pride she felt was almost overwhelming. After the ceremony, as Eleanor was reviewing schedules in her office, a visitor was announced. The Dowager Duchess of Ashmont swept in, resplendent despite her years, her sharp eyes taking in the modest but efficient workspace. Your Grace? Eleanor rose, surprised. I did not expect to see you here. I came to see what you have built, my dear, and I must say I am impressed. The Dowager settled into a chair without waiting for an invitation. I also came to deliver news, though I suspect you care little for it. My son's engagement to Lady Cordelia has been dissolved. She broke it off 3 weeks ago, claiming she could not marry a man who was in love with someone else. Eleanor's hands stilled on the papers she had been organizing. I am sorry to hear that. Are you? The dowager's gaze was penetrating. Sebastian has been quite wretched since your marriage. He finally realized what he had lost, but far too late. Lady Cordelia, for all her faults, was perceptive enough to see that she would always be second choice. Your Grace, I do not wish to be unkind, but the Duke's feelings are no longer my concern. I am happily married to a good man, and I have work that fulfills me. Whatever might have been between your son and myself is long past. I know, child, and I am glad for you. You have made a far better life than the one I tried to arrange for you. The dowager stood, preparing to leave. But I thought you should know that Sebastian has finally learned a valuable lesson about judging people by their character rather than their station. It is a pity he learned it too late to benefit from it himself. After the dowager left, Eleanor sat quietly for a moment, processing the information. She felt sympathy for the Duke, but it was the distant sympathy one might feel for a character in a novel, someone whose struggles were real but no longer personally affecting. Her life had moved beyond him, beyond the humiliation of that terrible night, beyond the limitations that society had tried to impose upon her. That evening, she and James walked home together through streets fragrant with spring blossoms. They discussed the day's events, the students' progress, plans for the hospital's expansion. Their conversation was easy, punctuated by laughter and the comfortable silences of two people who need not fill every moment with words. "Eleanor," James said as they reached their front door, "I have been thinking. In a few years, when the school is well established, perhaps we might travel. I would love to show you the hospitals in Edinburgh and Paris, to introduce you to colleagues who are doing remarkable work. We could make it a working honeymoon of sorts." "I would like that very much." Eleanor smiled up at her husband, this good man who saw her as a partner in all things. "Though I confess I am quite content with our life as it is. As am I, but there is always more to learn, more to accomplish. Together." "Together," Eleanor agreed, and they went inside to the home they had made, the life they had built, the future they would shape side by side. 6 months later, Eleanor received one final letter from Ashmont House. It was from Lady Beatrice, now 12 years old and as spirited as ever. "Dear Mrs. Hartwell, I am writing to tell you that Uncle Sebastian has gone to America. He says he needs to see something of the world beyond London society. Grandmother says he is running away from his mistakes, but I think he is finally trying to become the person he should have been all along. He asked me to give you a message. He said to tell you that he understands now what he failed to see before, that true worth has nothing to do with birth or position, and everything to do with character and courage. He said you taught him that lesson, though he was too foolish to learn it in time. I miss you, dear Mrs. Hartwell, but I am so very glad you are happy. Your affectionate former pupil, Beatrice." Eleanor folded the letter carefully and added it to the small collection she kept in her desk, reminders of the path that had brought her to this place. She thought of the Duke, somewhere across the Atlantic, perhaps finally learning to see people as they truly were, rather than as society defined them. She hoped he would find peace, even happiness, but his journey was no longer connected to hers. Her own journey had taken her from the golden cage of arranged marriage to the freedom of chosen partnership, from the humiliation of public rejection to the satisfaction of meaningful work, from being defined by others to defining herself. She had bloomed where she was planted, yes, but more than that, she had chosen her own soil, tended her own growth, and created a garden entirely her own. That evening, as she and James sat together reviewing applications for the nursing school's second cohort, Eleanor reflected on how far she had come from that terrible night at the midsummer ball. The girl who had stood on that dais, publicly rejected and humiliated, seemed like a different person now, someone she remembered with compassion but no longer recognized as herself. She had been broken that night, yes, but she had also been freed. And from those broken pieces, she had built something far stronger and more beautiful than anything that had been taken from her. "What are you thinking about?" James asked, noticing her distant expression. "About second chances," Eleanor said, "and about how sometimes the worst thing that happens to us turns out to be the best thing in disguise." "The Duke's rejection, you mean?" "Yes. If he had married me, I would have been a duchess. I would have had wealth, position, security. But I would have been trapped in a life not of my choosing, married to a man who saw me as adequate rather than extraordinary. Instead, I have this: meaningful work, true partnership, a life built on my own terms. I would not trade it for any title in the world." James reached across the desk to take her hand. "I am the one who received the gift, Eleanor. You have made me happier than I ever imagined possible." "We have made each other happy," Eleanor corrected gently. "That is what partnership means." As the evening deepened and they continued their work side by side, Eleanor felt a profound sense of contentment. She had not married a duke. She had not become a duchess. But she had become something far more valuable: herself, fully and completely, without apology or compromise. And that, she knew, was the greatest triumph of all. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from. Your support means everything, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on Eleanor's journey from heartbreak to triumph.